The NHS spends around £3 million a year on homeopathic remedies, and the industry overall is worth around £40 million.
But does the science back it up? This week, the director of Boots the chemist controversially suggested there's no evidence the medicines are effective. We had such a big response to this story yesterday that we're hearing more on the debate today.
Yes, Professor George Lewis leads the Integrated Medicine Research Group at the University of Southampton. He's here with GP Dr. Sarah Jarvis. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can I just, I mean, the question is out there really. Do you have any faith in homeopathy, and do you use it in any sense with your patients?
I don't have any faith that homeopathy works in any way, shape or form, but I do believe that some patients who take homeopathic remedies are more likely to get better than if they took nothing. And that's because of something called the placebo effect. Now, one of the big problems we have with homeopathy is that there are reasons that scientific trials are done in the way they are. For instance, there are reasons that neither the doctor nor the patient knows which medicine they're taking. What few trials there are with homeopathy that have shown an improvement, basically either the doctor or the patient or both has known they're taking the homeopathic remedy rather than the sugar pill, and therefore they've had more faith in it.
They have known?
Yeah, usually.
OK. Professor George Lewis, what is the evidence, do you think?
With great respect, Sarah, that's not quite correct. For instance, the Arthritis Research Council made it very clear that there are 4 really quite high-quality positive trials for homeopathy in a very difficult disease to treat called fibromyalgia. So there really is evidence out there. It's patchy because we haven't done much research, but there really is evidence, and we're often faced with patients for whom we can do very little. It may well be that the homeopathic consultation itself is very powerful, but there is actual hard evidence that the homeopathic remedy really does do something, and very often for these patients we don't have much else to offer them. They may be in very difficult situations and we need to help them.
But Dr. Sarah Jarvis, you just simply disagree?
I absolutely disagree. The evidence that if you dilute something by a million to the power 14 times, it's more strong, it's more effective than if you dilute it to a million times less. The likelihood is, the theory of homeopathy is that the more you dilute something, the more effective it is. You get to the stage where it's got something called a potency of 14, and you've reached a stage where the likelihood is that there is not one single molecule of this left in what you're giving the patient, not one molecule. So the theory is that water has a memory. It remembers being in contact with that. Well, by the time tap water gets to London, it's been through 9 people's bodies. I really hope it doesn't have a memory.
Professor, can I just put this is an email that's coming to us. Paul Watson, I'm a pharmacist, he says, I know of no significant double-blind trials of homeopathic medicines that have proved their effectiveness. Moreover, as all pharmacies are professionally regulated, subject to strict codes of ethics, it's a debatable point whether any of them should be selling or dispensing homeopathic remedies. I mean, that's a very practical application of an academic debate.
It is a very practical application of an academic debate. The evidence, I mean, with the greatest respect, the evidence is quite clear that in some instances homeopathy does have an effect. I don't understand the mechanism. I agree with Sarah. The mechanism is implausible. We need to explain that mechanism. Just because science comes up with data for which we don't have an underlying process, that makes it very difficult. Let's return to the patients. The patients often get benefit from homeopathy. There is some evidence to support it, not conclusive. There isn't enough work in this area, but we do need to listen to the patients and take that forward.
Dr. Sarah Jarvis, a couple of points. Firstly, the NHS does fund some homeopathic treatments, and also the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency has granted us a licence to a homeopathic remedy.
Well, the answer is that the MHRA is basically largely, as far as non-prescribed drugs are concerned with safety. So, for instance, with a lot of the herbal remedies, some of which actually have a much stronger evidence base, the MHRA is prepared to grant a licence as long as they're prepared under safe conditions. What they're worried about is safety. Their view is that if, at best, it's not going to do you any harm and that's what you want to spend your money on, that's fine. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to go. The NHS spends spending its money on it is a completely different matter. Because effectively what we're saying is that if patients are being referred for homeopathy, that is the NHS's money that means that my patients cannot get the newest proven drug or they cannot get physiotherapy. So there are real consequences. And the other thing that I think Professor Lewis hasn't touched on at all is that he has quite reasonably said that if there are patients for whom we can offer nothing, they believe this is going to help and it will. That's the sort of time where I wouldn't have a problem with a patient taking homeopathy. But unfortunately, all too often, homeopaths think of themselves as alternative medics. 50% of homeopaths in a survey told parents not to take told patients not to take anti-malarials when they went to a malarious area, and told parents not to give their children immunisation, even though the faculty of homeopathy has said there is no evidence that homeopathic protection against immunisation works.
So, Professor, a GP is saying, if you like, it could be, potentially, the only way it could be used is as a last resort. When all else has failed, then just give it a try and it doesn't really matter. Do you think that's a fair way to look at it?
I think that's one way to look at it. I think there are lots of patients who use it as primary care, and sometimes for conditions where conventional medicine has very little to offer. In a sense, Dr. Jarvis is suggesting that we have really solid evidence for an awful lot of what we use in general practice. We have good evidence for about 20 or 25% of what we use in general practice. So if we applied the same rules as she's suggesting, there'd be an awful lot of things that the NHS wouldn't provide. I think the evidence for homeopathy is a little stronger. Medically qualified homeopaths certainly don't recommend that patients don't take antimalarials or not have vaccination.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Sarah. I see you shaking your head. Do you want a very quick last thought?
Yeah, perfectly simple. Prescription drugs don't get licences until they've had really high quality trials which prove that they work and that it's not the placebo effect, it's not the doctor or the patient thinking one medicine's going to work.
Rather like Prozac, which we don't have, there's a big debate as to whether it works better than placebo.
I'm sorry to wind it up. We're clearly not going to resolve the entire debate here, but thank you both very much for coming this morning.
Indeed.
Thank you.